And now, The Good, the Bad, and the Weird presents a solo rant on video game adaptations. This is Nicho, by the way. The only one who's going to be on this recording today. We've been trying to refine our content a little bit, and make some changes here and there. And the Spotlight episodes is going to be one of those things that changes up a little bit. You might not have noticed, but on the last one I did, it was with my buddy Sugi Logic on his stream where we discussed Star Wars, which also plug, check out Sugi Logic's Twitch stream. Great guy, just does all kinds of fun, stupid stuff, and I enjoy being there. But of the changes we have been rolling out, this is probably going to be the least changed, is the Spotlight episodes. We'll be covering topics such as filmmakers, history, tropes, genres, but it's also a way for us to get guests on the show. Just friends and other people we know, or hopefully eventually people in the industry will get onto the podcast and we'll be able to just talk about a topic or movies in general. But we'll see. I mean, it's still experimental a little bit, so we're trying to do little things here and there. As well, this is the case for today's episode. I'm doing a solo rant. And this idea came when Chris had to be quarantined due to COVID precautions and delaying our recording to miss a couple weeks of episodes. And at that time, I had an idea to rant about video game movie adaptations since Uncharted had just come out, and I was in the midst of playing through the franchise. I think at that time I was only in the first game, or by the second one. I'm not 100% sure. But it's also a way for us to talk about our solo watches, as well as trends we see and other topics we want to discuss that the other might not have the expertise to discuss, or just doesn't feel like talking about it 100%. So we'll see where these go. It's going to be hit and miss, and we're going to just do them whenever we feel like it. So don't expect the Spotlight to be as constant as our other episodes, but they'll be scattered throughout. But the reason I also chose video game live action adaptations, partially because I love both mediums and their storytelling methods and just the different things that each one can do. I love storytelling. So video games, that's one of the biggest things for me, despite me playing farm sims here and there. And actually Dark Souls 3. But one of my biggest things was that I love RPGs. I love storytelling in games and the different ways to do it. And though movies have become more prominent in my life, I still like video games. And so I like to see how they're translated between different mediums. But I also wanted to talk about how, in many ways, video game movies and the evolution of their changes. And just what I've seen as I've been going through them. As well, love or hate them, movies based on video games are here to stay, with 19 currently listed as upcoming, according to Wikipedia. But we'll see if they bear fruit. Now, I do want to state from the beginning that this discussion, or this rant, will just be only English language domestic theatrical releases, because otherwise I would never really be able to talk about the just the plethora of animated films, along with all the non-theatrical releases and sequels, prequels. As well, I feel they deserve their own topic, as animated and also foreign adaptations command a different level of comparison, as they have different standards and expectations, I would say. And maybe that bleeds in a little bit into what we expect from a major studio theatrically releasing a video game adaptation. On top of that, while I have seen a lot of video game movies, I have not seen every single one due to either their availability or just lack of time and not wanting to burn myself out on them. So take that with a grain of salt when I talk about this. This list includes Wing Commander, which could not find anywhere, Blood Rain, which I could only find the direct-to-video sequel. Same with, or actually, I couldn't find anything with Postal. In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege tale. Far Cry, and the two I didn't get to, that I do have access to, are Hitman, Agent 47, and the second Sonic the Hedgehog movie. I'll also try not to focus too hard on one single movie or franchise, but to put a little data on it. With the 44 theatrically released movies listed on Wikipedia, 16% of them are Resident Evil, or from the Resident Evil franchise, including the new the new reboot, I think is what they were calling it. And 36% of them are within the horror genre, and almost everything else is an action-adventure genre. There's not really any, I guess, dating sims or any drama adaptations, really. A lot of them deal with either horror or straight-up action for the most part. And I bring this up because I think it's a little telling as to what kind of audience the filmmakers are trying to cater towards, which I will talk about a little bit later, and my thoughts and issues on video game movie adaptations. But I think in this mindset that we have a very set audience that they're trying to get to, and it's generally not necessarily the gamer or the fans. And unfortunately, that's a little bit concerning and sad sometimes. And while many people might say that all video game live actions are horrible, and to a certain extent I agree, I think that we need to take into consideration a little bit the games that they were based on, and that needs to be taken into account. Just honestly, in general, in anything, whether it's Starship Troopers or Harry Potter, you got to take into account what the movie ends up doing. On another note, I have not played every single game from these movies that they were inspired by, but I do normally play a lot of RPG and some horror here and there, which I have played a good chunk of the horror video game adaptations. So with that all out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about my thoughts on, first off, the evolution of video game movies, which, at least in my opinion, can be broken down roughly into 3 eras. One I'm calling the pre-Resident Evil, post-Resident Evil, and the current era, which I don't particularly have a name for since it's still working itself out and intermingles with the post-Resident Evil era quite a bit. But there is a shift that I don't think has truly worked itself out, or people have really taken into consideration how far this medium has come. And while it's still evolving, and until I see a clear break, I guess I'm going to refer to this third era as the modern era, which of course comes with its own issues in labeling, like with modernist architecture, whose origins are now almost 100 years old. So who knows what video game movies are going to be doing 100 years from now. I mean, hell, Mario came out in 1993, and we're sitting in almost 30 years later. We're still in the early days of this stuff. It's still evolving. And so with that rough outline on the history, let's start diving into the pre-Resident Evil era. That was from about, not, well, it was from 1993 to 2002. All of which begins with the famously terrible Super Mario Bros., which, again, to make it clear, while Super Mario Bros. Is the first theatrically released live action, it is not the first video game movie. That goes to Super Mario Bros. Peach Hime Kyushutsu Dai Saikusen, or Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach. Coming out alongside Running Boy Star Soldier no Mimitsu in July 20th, 1986. And on top of that, it's not even Super Mario Bros. The American one is not the first video game live action to come out. And to no surprise, it comes from Japan with 1988's Mirai Ninja. To note as well, there are a few other animated and television movies that came out between those releases and Super Mario Bros. But not that they contributed the whole, but I think it'd just be nice to dispel this thought that the Super Mario Bros. Is the first video game movie, but it is the first major theatrically released video game movie. And while it is easy to dismiss Super Mario Bros. As being a bad movie, along with Double Dragon, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat, or just say that they're cheesy attempts to make a buck off of a popular trend, I think we also need to look at the state of video games at the time. By 1993, we had 7 2D Mario games, where their plots were all based around rescuing the princess and going to different lands, with the oddball being Super Mario Land 2, the 6 golden coins, being about Mario reclaiming his castle, all which I had to look up. Because besides saving Peach, there's not much for the games to be based off of. I mean, it's a game about jumping on platforms, mushrooms, turtles, and getting to the end of the level. I mean, it's an oversimplification, and it's not that much of an exaggeration. I mean, most people I know who play Super Mario Bros. Play it for the gameplay and not the story. So, that being said, as for the other mentioned franchises, Mortal Kombat, Double Dragon, they both had 3 games, and Street Fighter only had 2 games by the time their respective movies were released, of which Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter are about martial arts tournaments to fight an evil force, and Double Dragon is Mario, but instead of jumping on stuff, Mario threw hands. So, I mean, there wasn't a lot to go off of. And all of which I can honestly enjoy watching as it is, since they are fun and dumb movies, but they just also represent a large entity taking their first stab at translating a relatively new medium that had seen, at the time, really was not seen as anything more than entertainment for children and nerds. I mean, that is, and for me, that is what defines the first era of video game movies. They are not good, and most of them are downright bad, but they don't feel like serious attempts at making a good movie, and in general just feel like bad cash grabs, which also might stem from the other side of the coin, where video games for many years, at this point at least, and even still to come, have been making horrible cash grabs of movies to tie into their games. So, and I guess it'd now be called shovelware, but that's exactly what we were seeing at this point. It was kind of like just this quick exchange of trying to make something off of something else that was popular, kind of like an accessory to it. All of this, in my opinion, began to change with the release of Lara Croft Tomb Raider in 2001, which itself took itself a little bit serious, and it felt like a much more mature movie in comparison to the previous films, despite not being the first one to have a big name in it. The reason I don't consider this as really the turning point is because it still felt like it catered to video game fans as well as horned up teenagers with Angelina Jolie. Like, I mean, that really was kind of that mindset back then of, let's put a pretty face to it and the kids will eat it up. And so, the reason I feel the tone of video game movies shifted was due to Resident Evil in 2002. And why I call this era before Resident Evil, pre-Resident Evil. And, of course, the after post-Resident Evil. Because while not a great movie, I think the first Resident Evil did something other films before had not done. And that it was making a more relatively decent horror film that if you had not played the games, the movie stood on its own. And to be fair, you can say the same happened with Lara Croft, but it still feels like it catered a little bit too heavily to the style of or video games in general, and making difficult puzzles. And I mean, it tied into Indiana Jones here and there, but it was very heavily, I guess, Matrix influenced a bit, where there was heavily on wires, where Resident Evil didn't have that feeling yet. So it's a kind of in-between era, but I don't think, at least for me, Tomb Raider really changed the face of video game movie adaptations the way Resident Evil did. But on top of that, Resident Evil also felt like truly a serious attempt at retelling the events rather than slapping a label on it and sticking the name of the game character on it, which in some regards I think is my other issue with the Lara Croft movie. Don't get me wrong, they're both fun and stupid movies if you're looking for entertainment, but they're not great movies. Unfortunately, though, Resident Evil sequels had a different kind of consequence on the style of video game movies that honestly would take up on that until really 2016's Warcraft. And, I mean, all video game movies besides Silent Hill have a certain level of what I guess edginess, where they were trying to be cool and dangerous, but it only comes across as trying too hard by today's lenses, which, as a kid watching some of these, super dope movies. Going back to them as an adult, I'm like, oh, this is pretty dumb and stupid, but it's fun. And this may also be in part due to the movies mainly consisting of action and trying to mimic what became the Resident Evil style. And, I mean, it also might come from how video games were presented back in the 90s and 2000s, where they were supposed to be extreme. I mean, hell, we saw the commercials back in the day for like Capri Suns and stuff, where everyone was riding skateboards, and I guess that's just how, like, it was kind of the invasion of like the old ideas of skater culture that came into the modern zeitgeist of video game movies, and it persisted for a long time. While not necessarily a bad thing, it feels like every video game movie within this time frame was trying to take after a more successful franchise or another property. Not necessarily a video game movie, not necessarily the video game itself, but trying to mimic the movie off of another famous franchise with slapping a title on it from a video game to get another group of audience to come in. And as I mentioned in our Silent Hill Revelations video, the producers wanted the second Silent Hill to be more Resident Evil style rather than a Silent Hill game, which is why the second one is god-awful. Outside of that example, the other two films that stick out in my mind are 2014's Need for Speed and 2010's Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time. Need for Speed feels, like I said, it's one of these ones where it feels like a knockoff of the Fast and the Furious franchise while piggybacking off of Aaron Paul's success with Breaking Bad and slapping a video game name on it. I mean, I've seen a little bit of Need for Speed. I know my brother played it a little bit here and there. But the game, or the movie, was so drawn out for what it was and tried focusing a little bit too hard on family and the emotional aspects about a game that's all about racing and crashing. I'm aware of it, but I haven't gone too far into it, but that's neither here or there. As for Prince of Persia, while I had seen this one in theaters, when I rewatched it, I had a different idea about it, because it felt like instead of they were trying to make a video game movie, they were trying to recreate The Mummy, but with a more, I guess, supernatural and video game based world. Which it came with a complete heart-to-heart moment about the princess's paternal history that was reminiscent of I can't remember her name, Rachel Weisz's character, and on that, the actress Gemma Arterton kind of looks like Rachel Weisz, and Jake Gyllenhaal has that kind of outsider, rugged Brendan Fraser feeling that The Mummy had going for it. And again, this concept isn't a bad idea, as we see semi-exploitative trends in the industry as studios attempt to make money through trends such as like when Hunger Games came out, and then we had a slurry of young adult dystopian movies dropping every few months because it's just the nature of the industry. They see something good, and they try and run off with their own ideas with it and capitalize on it. It's not a bad move. Strike while the iron's hot, as they say, I guess. But it just doesn't make for a good movie or video game adaptation. And I think that's the defining feature of the post-Resident Evil era, that everything feels like it was trying to do this. I mean, Max Payne felt like an edgier Punisher Marvel movie, which I know didn't do so well either. And like the first Hitman movie feels very much like a Jason Bourne movie, but we already know he's an assassin from the get-go. It just doesn't... It's an era that was trying to figure itself out through mimicking other more successful franchises. And now, with that in mind, when it comes to the modern era video game movies, we have a speckling of different approaches that range from the old throw something at the wall and see what works, to let's actually try and make something good. And while I feel Need for Speed attempted to take a serious approach, it felt more, like I mentioned before, like a video game or a movie about a video game, or just it felt more like just a racing movie with a video game name slapped on it. And where I feel the first shift truly took place was with 2016's Warcraft, in which I feel they attempted to make a truly good stab at making a fantasy movie. I say this also, but I don't know the lore of the game, nor have I played World of Warcraft. But I will say, it's not that horrible of a movie. It falls flat. It doesn't have the richness that I feel Lord of the Rings had. I mean, there's stuff there, but I just don't think it hit that same feeling, you know? And I mean, the other issue with it is it's a lot of dealing with decades of content to condense and bring newer audiences up to snuff. And that I feel the same can be said for the Assassin's Creed movie, Tomb Raider, Detective Pikachu, Sonic the Hedgehog. They're all pretty much decent video game movie adaptations that came after Warcraft, with a few exceptions, where they were honestly trying to do something serious and make something good. Those exceptions, of course, being the final Resident Evil movie in the original run, Rampage, Dead Trigger, Monster Hunter, and Werewolves Within. The reason I picked these was for various different reasons. Resident Evil, obviously, since it continued the old trend of edgy garbage but entertaining movies. And also the Resident Evil remake, where it's a little bit later, but they tried to make something more game adjacent. Rampage, because it did feel like the old style, where there wasn't much of a story to the original games, and the ones I could find were much better than the movie. But it feel like they were throwing something at the wall and see if it stuck, while still also kind of piggybacking off of the Godzilla and King Kong movies of like, oh, well, this video game franchise has giant monsters. These movies have giant monsters. People must want a Rampage movie. It's that kind of mindset, I feel. Dead Trigger, the only reason I bring this one up, because it's the first mobile game that we've seen pop up that has a movie based off of it, besides Dead Birds. Or, Dead Birds? No, Angry Birds. But at the end of it all, it's a very generic movie with a game name slapped on it. And Monster Hunter, because, again, it just feels like a movie that could have had any other name slapped on it, and it wouldn't have changed what it was. It felt like it was riding on the isekai trend that was kind of growing in popularity, as well. Also felt a way for director Paul W.S. Anderson to throw his wife Mia Jovanovic in after her End of Resident Evil movies ended, and get another franchise going, because the whole movie is just one giant setup to nothing, really. I mean, it set it up to have another movie, and it didn't do a good job making a first movie, so it just doesn't fall in. And also, Werewolves Within, because despite it being a video game movie, it doesn't feel like one, because the dynamics of it come more from, I guess, what it would be like to be in a Dungeons and Dragons chat, but without a dungeon master, as it's a bunch of just quirky characters, and the game itself doesn't have much of a plot besides find who the werewolf is. Despite the more serious approach, we are still seeing a wide range of movies that don't quite hit the mark, but we are seeing a change, and something different in some regards. We're at this point where we don't have 100% the best video game movie that's going to appeal to everyone. Because I don't think, to be honest, there's not one that's going to, but we're at least seeing a shift in the industry on what they're trying to do. But what was the point of bringing up the whole history of video game movies that I've ranted about for about 20 minutes now? Well, for me, it was a way to explain some of the changes I saw through films, through video game films. And it's a good way of setting up where we're getting to it, because, let's face it, video game movies really aren't going anywhere. But they are slowly getting better as technology is able to keep up with the visions. Despite this, they are still probably one of the more difficult kinds of adaptations to make and transfer, especially of ideas across mediums, such as like manga or anime or written material in general. And with all this in mind, the issue I feel plagues live-action video game adaptations is a multifaceted issue. One is that video games seem to have a hard time transferring from an interactive medium to a rather sedimentary medium and just more of a viewer-based medium, because often there's this bit of focus on trying to make nods to the gameplay, which I always find weird. And often, most of it is kind of in your face saying like, look, we played the games too. We made the movie star do the thing from the game or say the phrase. I mean, and I do appreciate good nods here and there, but when a character stops mid-movie to say some shit like fatality, it just kind of kills the flow of the movie when it's trying to be serious. The same thing happened with Monster Hunter once we finally got to the actual green parts of the land and weren't in a desert. There's a whole part with the what are the cat characters called? Whatever. Your cat companions. There was a cook one, and there was this whole like kind of fan servicey, not fan servicey in the erotic manner, but like just kind of like, hey, we played the games, we know this cat's a cook, so we did a quick 10-second scene of him cooking stuff. It feels lazy, is what it is. And, I mean, it also comes in twofolds as well, where there are elements and parts that work in the film's favor. One example that I thought integrated and had little nods to the gameplay that did very well was the Uncharted franchise, where if I had not played the games, I probably wouldn't have noticed that, like, Nathan Drake in that movie's climbing style is very much like the games. Instead of, like, climbing fist over fist, he's leaping over like in the game, leaping up like in the game. But it did it well and integrated it quite fluidly, I thought. As well in the Sonic the Hedgehog movie with incorporating the rings into the plot, and Detective Pikachu with its use of Pokemon attacks and really bringing life to those worlds. They didn't feel like they stopped the plot at all. That being said, I often feel like it's trying to cater in a way to try and be on the inside without really fully understanding the material. It's just a blatant slap on, hey, look at us, we did the thing, basically. I mean, it's the same stuff we see over and over. At least in the original game movies, when it did that, but it was cheesily done, because it was a cheesy movie to begin with. Whereas they're trying to take this stuff more seriously nowadays, it just doesn't work. And I feel they distract from the plot quite a bit. And since we're on the subject of plot, I think people complain a lot about how these movies don't hit all the plot points in a game. Which, I know it used to be the same, especially towards, not necessarily video game movies, because there wasn't that many when I was a kid, but like early Harry Potter movies. And to be fair, that's the thing, is people are going to latch on to side characters that might not necessarily work well in the overall arc of the story they're trying to tell. And to be fair, when I was a lot younger, I really liked Nearly Headless Nick, partly because we had the same name, and I was disappointed when he fell off later on in the franchise. But I feel we have that as well in video game movies, where someone likes, this one character, and then you play the game, and they're in the game for like a chapter, and then they're gone. But after growing up and hitting all the plot points doesn't always make for a good cohesive story experience when a page of action can last 5 minutes or more. And that's the hardest thing, is condensing everything. Because video games themselves have become longer and longer and more complex as their stories evolve. And they have the ability to tell exposition or time to explain events that a movie doesn't have time for. For example, I'm going to use Uncharted again because it's one of the more recent movies in the public conscious, but if you look up Uncharted the game, the movie, also a way to get the story of a number of games without having to spend 40 hours walking down a hallway to get good, you'll see that if you play all the cutscenes together for the first Uncharted game, it's just under an hour. But to skip ahead almost a decade later to Uncharted 4, the full story of cutscenes alone is nearly 6.5 hours. Now, imagine trying to condense all of that into one movie. And at most, I'd say a 2-hour movie to make it more marketable. It's not easy to do. Paired with studios who are less and less committed to longer running series after many tried to emulate what Marvel did, and it gets harder and harder to compress anything to that kind of level. And I think that's the biggest issue, is everyone wants to be like Marvel now. Or actually they're moving away from what Marvel was. So instead of committing to longer series, they're going back to, well, how can we condense this into one movie, and if it does well enough, we'll set it up so that way there's a sequel. I feel it's kind of a bit of lazy writing, to be honest. I mean, there's some that do it well, such as the new Batman movie, but there's others that don't, like Warcraft, where it sets it up, but it's just not a good enough movie, you know? as well, for all the nerds out there. If you combine all the Uncharted, the game, the movies, the main 4 games have a total cutscene runtime of 15 hours and 10 minutes for a movie. So, yeah, imagine trying to condense that into a story. As well, I also feels like there's studio interference, or the properties are being handled by people who see a popular franchise and see about making a quick buck off of it. It just doesn't feel like they have the same heart, like, comparatively to, like, still probably one of my favorite video game movie adaptations, Silent Hill. And I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. They almost feel like accessory merchandise to the original property at times. And it's really a shame where they could very easily stand alone as their own entity. Which leads me to my third point. I think the whole catering nature of the film and their difficulty to please fans as well as bring in new audiences. And this is by far the biggest hurdle to get over. I've noticed that people often fall into a few categories in this regard. And audiences in general. Where there are the folks who want the games to be word for word adaptation of the game and follow the lore to the T without any deviation, because lo and behold, the little nuance of this bug dying caused the end of the world. Which I am noticing that's less and less as there's so many games and so many movies coming out that you can't really dedicate your time and life to that. And we're also getting older, so we're having a different understanding of time. But those who want to see the aspects of the story, and I don't know, it's hard to please the fans who are expecting it to be a specific way because of the game. The other people I see are the ones who want to see aspects of the story reworked into something new, or more of a story from that world rather than a direct adaptation. I personally fall into this camp. And thirdly, those who just don't give a shit and want to see a good movie despite having no previous experience with the franchise. Just generally any moviegoer who doesn't play video games or has not played those kind of games. And as I learned from my HVAC classes in college, your goal is to please the majority, which is difficult as video games become more and more mainstream and people become more critical of of both mediums and their respectable works. And to each of these, I do have complaints. Mainly the first group, because you guys need to get over yourself, you group of giant nerds. But I hear that people complain that the movies lack the nuance and the detail missing from the games. And often the detail and nuance is left to exposition and minute details that are not really noticeable, or you can't really replicate them in a movie the same way you can in a game. The mediums don't necessarily translate letter for letter. And I do go back to combining your 500 hours of emotional investment into a 2-hour time frame. That's also a hard aspect to get over. Like, especially, I mean, and that falls for me too. Like, I love reading manga more than I like watching anime. And that's because I come from a drawing background and I like the details and the little things that the manga can do that the anime can't. Again, you lose information whenever you translate across mediums. And one example of a movie trying to make the movie too much like the game is the Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City. While I understand the complaints about the changing of the characters' personalities and roles, it sticks pretty heavily to the original feel of the game, which unfortunately doesn't really do it any favors, to be honest. I mean, it is kind of a slow, drawn-out movie for what it is. And say what you want about the rearranging of the personal characters and roles, I think it tried to do something different and make itself separate from the original Resident Evil movies. And that it succeeded. To what success? I don't really know, because it wasn't... I mean, we'll see what happens if there's another sequel made or anything, but it just felt, again, like it could have been any other zombie movie, but you slapped Resident Evil on it and painted some of the characters. It's kind of the same, what's the term? The same, not pandering, but catering. The same catering that we saw in the second Resident Evil movie. They just said, oh, well, screw it, we're gonna slap some video game character names on there and fans will enjoy that, right? And that's how I felt about that one. And I mean, I'm also critical of my own faction too, don't get me wrong. Oftentimes the rearranging can kill what the source material was about, and that can be either good or bad. But at least for me, they're trying to make something different, because I don't want to go and see a direct carbon copy of what I just experienced. It's like copying a VHS to DVD and expecting it to be something completely different. And for me, that's the case of Monster Hunter, and on the bad side of it, where the idea just felt lazy and flushed out. It was lazy and not flushed out. It just was, I don't know, it just felt like, oh, we're gonna put this star here, here's some monsters, let's go. Which, I mean, is the game, but it didn't feel connected. It just felt rough around. It felt super rough and not anywhere near the level of a good movie. I mean, often than not, when they try and rearrange the same elements, it just feels slightly different, and not in a good way. I think both these two factions can be regrouped in the fact that I think if they just made a good movie and didn't try catering and focusing on, oh, this is what the fans want or what the fans are expecting, I think we could be in a good space. But I think the fourth largest and most recent issue that faces video game film adaptations is the fact that video games themselves are becoming more and more cinematic in their approach, where no longer do we have like the static cutscenes of characters talking back and forth. Now, a lot of times, games feel like movies. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle for them to overcome, if at all. I mean, probably the ones that could use it a little bit more, of course, are your more traditional platformers like Mario and whatnot. But it is still going to be an issue because now you're having to compete on a medium that can get different angles that your camera can't do. Or we're going to have to rely more and more on CGI, and I'm definitely still one of those people who still really enjoys practical effects. So, I think video game movies have come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. We still are in the early years of making video game movies and trying to get a good consistency from them. And I think that this era, we're going to see a change in it. And who knows, this episode might age poorly, and oh hell, we might see an end to video game movies. I don't think we will, but I think we're going to see a change in what they're trying to do as things become more difficult to replicate. And honestly, I do think it is kind of a shame because some of these franchises have potential. Like, their first movies are not so great, but I can see them improving and making the second one much better, which unfortunately do see some of this end because fans are upset over a casting and they boycott shit, and it makes stuff not progress because there's no criticism for it. It's just like, oh, we don't like what you did, so we're not going to see it. Just a mentality that doesn't improve the genre at all. So, I don't know. I think video game movies there's definitely a change in the style of them. I think there's something on the horizon that I think we're going to get blown away by. Like, for me, example, when I saw Detective Pikachu, I thought, oh, this is going to be really bad. Then I went and saw it, and I'm like, they did a really good job. It's probably, for me, the second best video game movie we've ever had. And honestly, of the more recent ones, it is the best one. They really made a world that felt realistic, and they did a fantastic job with it. I just don't think we're going to see anything like that really for a while, especially with the list of ones that are going to come out. Maybe the Ghost of Tsushima movie will do really well, but again, that's just conjecture. I won't know until I actually see it. But I think we are in exciting times for this. We are seeing the changes, and we're seeing what's out there. So I guess for this spotlight, what I'm going to do, since I haven't really done a ranking system or anything, I think I'll just give my favorite movies from the different of the three different eras. So, starting off from the very first era, I think probably my favorite adaptation is Double Dragon. And I'll give these recommendations because I think people should go out and watch them. Double Dragon by far is my most favorite of the pre-Resident Evil era because, one, it's super campy. The movie knows what it is. It feels like Mad Max meets a video game. And it does it well. That's the thing, is that it's such a stupid idea, but it works. As for the second era, I still gotta give it to Silent Hill. I mean, it did such a good job rearranging and reworking the plot into something better than anything we'd seen by that point. And yeah, Doom's fun, it's stupid. First Resident Evil is good. Most of the other ones aren't very good at all. Particularly Tekken. Tekken was particularly bad. Same with Street Fighter, The Legend of Chun-Li, where they got really weird and just a bit preachy, in my opinion, where like they were trying to convey a message rather than make a movie and people find the message from it. And maybe that's the big thing too, is like it's not like a Coen Brothers movie where a Coen Brothers movie is just a story, or like a Guillermo del Toro movie where it's just a story and you find the meaning to it yourself in watching it, or you find out something about yourself. Now, as for the post-Resident Evil era, or the modern era, I've honestly got to give it to Detective Pikachu. And I know it's probably not shocking at all. I mean, of those three, we've done episodes on 2 of them. But, I don't know, I just think it held itself up for being its standalone. And whether you like the CGI or not, I think they did a good job with making it believable. So, but anywho, that's my rant on video game movie adaptations. I look forward to doing these in the future. Again, I'm just going to go through. They're going to be random. They're not going to be, this is going to be the next one's going to be a continuation of this. I'm just going to go through them as I see changes or I come across certain topics in movies. So, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did or didn't or disagree with me at all and think I'm a dipshit, just reach out to us. I mean, we're on pretty much every social platform, and yeah, just that's my thoughts on video game movies, and I'm a random stranger on the internet. So, but anywho, this has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird Spotlights. Thanks for listening. Peace. I'll figure out a way to end these. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.